You've got two problems. First, you know a kid whose parents are killed by an escaped rhinoceros, so he's living in a house-sized fuzzy fruit to escape his evil aunts. And he needs help. Second, your own infant son has been hit by a car, and the medical device needed to drain a life-threatening abundance of cerebrospinal fluid won't stop clogging. If you are Roald Dahl, you just sit down and solve them both. How? How did the same guy who crafted wild universes populated by gizzard gulpers and Oompa Loompas also save thousands and probably tens of thousands of lives by advancing science and technology in the real world? We've been conditioned to believe that scientific minds are cold, calculating, and logical, while artistic minds are fiery, free, and creative. Roald Dahl created messy, fantastic worlds teeming with weird people and unfathomable problems. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the BFG, James and the Giant Peach, Matilda. And then he found a way to get his characters to a place of joy and happiness. In his own life, he was the character with problems, and he didn't have an author to write his way out of tragedy. Does navigating the world's problems take the mind of an artist or the mind of a scientist? And what if the real difference between the mad scientist who runs the chocolate factory and the one who figures out how to split an atom is absolutely nothing? The origin stories of both villains and heroes are always pretty suspect. It's usually a lot more complex than one thing that sets a person on a particular path. But what kicked off Roald Dahl's interest in medicine may very well have been something that happened before he was born. It's also one of the most harrowing stories I've ever heard. His father Harold was 14 when he slipped and fell off the roof while he was up there trying to fix some tiles. He crashed to the ground and broke his elbow. It was a pretty standard accident for 1877, and he's lucky it was just a broken arm. But what happened next was a mix of Shakespearean farce and medieval torture. Dahl wrote in his autobiography Boy that somebody ran to fetch the doctor, and half an hour later, this gentleman made a majestic and drunken arrival in his horse-drawn buggy. He was so drunk that he mistook the fractured elbow for a dislocated shoulder. "We'll soon put this back into place," he cried out, and two men were called off the street to help with the pulling. They were instructed to hold my father by the waist while the doctor grabbed him by the wrist of the broken arm and shouted, "Pull, men, pull! Pull as hard as you can!" The pain must have been excruciating. Harold screamed in pain and his mother cried out for them to stop. But by then, the pullers had done so much damage that a splinter of bone was sticking out through the skin of the forearm. After that, there was no fixing the break, there was no saving Harold's arm either, and it had to be amputated at the elbow. If the entire Dahl clan never trusted a doctor again, who would blame them? When he was 4, Roald's sister died of appendicitis. The penicillin that would have saved her wouldn't be discovered for another 8 years. A few weeks later, his father died of pneumonia and heartbreak. By the time he put a dead mouse in a jar of gobstoppers at Mrs. Pratchett's candy store, Roald Dahl's life was already defined by illness, injury, and death. And then Roald was subjected to his own boyhood medical barbarity. While on vacation to his family's native Norway, Roald had trouble breathing. The problem seemed to be adenoid hypertrophy. His nasopharyngeal tonsil, the lymphatic glands where the nose turns into the throat, was enlarged. Adenoids trap bacteria and viruses, then identify them to release the right response from the immune system. It's only a temporary system. Your body eventually fights infection in more sophisticated ways. By the time you're in school, they usually start to shrink and they're nearly gone by your teens. Roald felt all right. He didn't even know why he was going to the doctor. "It won't take 2 seconds," the doctor said. He spoke gently and I was seduced by his voice. Like an ass, I opened my mouth. The tiny blade flashed in the bright light and disappeared into my mouth. It went up high into the roof of my mouth, and then the hand that held the blade gave 4 or 5 very quick little twists, and the next moment, out of my mouth into the basin came tumbling a whole mass of flesh and blood. Roald's surprise adenoidectomy came with no warning and no anesthesia. He was 8 years old. If his early life was defined by bad doctors, the end of his life was improved by a very good one. As he was fighting and ultimately losing a battle with blood cancer, Roald Dahl stumbled on Dr. Tom Solomon. Now, Dr. Solomon is a professor of neurology at the University of Liverpool and a director of the Pandemic Institute. He tweets as Running Mad Prof because he set the Guinness World Record for running the fastest marathon dressed as a doctor, and he set another record in 2014 for creating the world's biggest brain out of 687 people. But back then, he was a young man excited about solving the mysteries of medicine and preserving humanity and dignity along the way. Through their many long chats, they discovered that Roald Dahl was a writer who probably should have been a doctor, and that Tom Solomon was a doctor who probably needed to be a writer. And their relationship started kind of awkwardly. Tom recalls in Roald Dahl's Marvelous Medicine that they met over a conversation about malaria, which Roald had been infected by while working for the Shell Petroleum Company in Africa. Dr. Solomon's international experience was at least as broad as Roald's, and he'd conducted research on the treatment and prevention of the disease. "And have you read any of my books?" he asked after a while. "Well," I said and paused, "I have not read any, but I loved the film of The Jungle Book." Tom doesn't say whether he was sincerely confusing Dahl with Rudyard Kipling, but Dahl took it as a joke and laughed, and we became good friends after that. Laughter is not the best medicine, but it's a part of medicine, and it's a part of science and research and the long, winding path to get to new discoveries, new cures, and even just getting better at working with the old ones, because science is actually pretty funny if you approach it the right way. Think about Augustus Gloop. He didn't just commit the deadly sin of gluttony, he committed a sin against chocolate science. Tom Solomon writes about a common experiment in medical school. Put a piece of white bread in your mouth and just let it sit. After several minutes, the enzymes in the saliva you've produced begin to break down the bread, and it actually begins to taste sweet. You need enough time for the salivary amylase to convert enough of the starch into smaller soluble starches and finally into maltose. You'd definitely get there if your gob was stopped by something designed to be everlasting, but bread works too. But think about what Augustus Gloop's rabid, unrestrained gluttony means in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the Willy Wonka films. He's not just disgusting and rude. He's consuming the chocolate so quickly and eating so much of it that he never allows Tom Solomon's enzyme process to take place at all, which means the confections that Willy Wonka put his life into perfecting and producing never get the chance to taste their sweetest. Augustus Gloop isn't just a glutton, he's a cretin. A kid gorging on chocolate and half drowning in a river of it is funny. Augustus's ignorance of the science of savoring actually deprives him of the very thing he wants more of, and that irony is legendary comedy funny. The thing is, the more you know about reality, the better you can twist it. And that's just a taste of Roald Dahl's implicit scientific genius. When you savor that, you begin to realize that his true scientific genius was explicit, and it was probably the result of brain damage. Roald Dahl served in the Royal Air Force in 1939 and trained as a pilot. He qualified as a fighter ace through World War II. But a crash landing in the Egyptian desert destroyed his nose, fractured his skull, and caused him to go blind for 6 weeks. Dahl saw that injury and its recovery as resulting in what we now call sudden artistic output syndrome, or acquired savant syndrome. Someone has a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, and that unlocks artistic ability they never had before. But Dahl always had an insane level of creativity. As a high school student, he spent time in his school's chemistry lab inventing chocolates and packaging them into little boxes as if he were some kind of, mad scientist running his own chocolate factory. But Dr. Solomon says it's possible that Dahl's brain injury sprinkled some magic on an already existing talent. It may well be that the head trauma caused mild damage to the frontal lobes of Dahl's brain, affecting his character and personality and releasing him from some of the inbuilt inhibitions that normally hold people back. Dahl was obsessed with medicine and how the brain worked, his own and everyone else's, and he needed every bit of that knowledge when his 4-month-old son's stroller was hit by a New York City taxi. The injury resulted in severe hydrocephalus, the buildup of cerebrospinal fluid within the brain. A year earlier, Dahl had written a short story called William and Mary, in which a woman's recently deceased husband has his brain transplanted from his body and attached to an artificial heart so it could survive, and there's even a single eyeball to allow it to see. This was not one of Roald Dahl's children's stories, but he was fresh off his own research into the intricacies of brain function. He saw his son and the doctors struggling with a constant churn of how to remove the excess cerebrospinal fluid, and the stakes were obviously high. The pressure from hydrocephalus in infants causes seizures, blindness, a whole litany of problems, including developing a large, severely misshapen head due to the malleability of the fontanelle. Even when doctors installed a shunt that could pump the cerebrospinal fluid out of the brain to relieve the pressure, there was a serious problem. The shunt's valve kept getting clogged by little bits of material, kind of like how your shower drain gets clogged by hair. And Dahl was fed up with the procedures and the attitudes of the medical staff. Dr. Solomon quotes a letter Dahl wrote to his mother. "I don't think much of the tubes that they use here for this work, particularly the valve at the lower end, which is meant to open up between 40mm and 80mm water column pressure. This valve is literally nothing but a slit in the plastic tube. Do they have anything better in England? Something less likely to block and clog?" Well, they did, and they didn't. The original valve that kept getting blocked was called a Holter valve. A Pundence valve was used instead, but that failed too, so they went back to the original. You're a parent, watching helplessly, day by day and month by month, as doctors and nurses try to keep your baby alive. He can't talk, but you can see the pain he's in, and you can witness him going in and out of consciousness as the pressure builds and wanes, seeing one day and blind the next, and you worry about the long-term damage and whether there even will be a long-term. And you're a pilot turned spy turned writer. You've written some articles about your experience in the war, a TV episode, a bunch of short stories, and one children's novel about gremlins destroying a plane. You're thinking about writing a book about a boy who crawls into a peach pit and befriends some bugs. If you are this man and your baby is fighting for his life, what do? Call a toy maker. When Dahl talked about it, he suggested that he really just made a few connections and provided some moral support along the way. The truth is a lot more interesting. He'd been talking with neurosurgeon Kenneth Till about how a valve could be designed to address the blockage problems, and Till had even let Dahl witness numerous shunt surgeries so he could see exactly how it all happened. They had ideas for a brand new design. The problem was finding who could actually make it. Dahl's friend Stanley Wade was a model airplane hobbyist and hydraulic engineer who crafted tiny precision engines for model planes. Dahl's daughter said that Stanley was a short, quiet man with twitchy lips that constantly pursed and relaxed, who was a brilliant metal turner who could turn a minute steel component to an accuracy of 10,000th of a millimeter, which sounds a lot like a character Roald Dahl would write. But the pumps in those minuscule plane engines Wade created never got blocked. Dahl and Wade started sketching out designs for how a new valve might work, and they collaborated with Till and specialists in the United States to refine it. Dahl wrote that he saw Wade nearly every day for 3 years. The end result was the Wade-Dahl-Till valve, a cerebral shunt valve their article in The Lancet described as having low resistance, ease of sterilization, no reflux, robust construction, and negligible risk of blockage. The valve was developed as a low-cost solution that could be used in developing countries, and thousands of children worldwide were fitted with the device, including Dahl's own godson. None of the men wanted to make any money off the device. Affordability was everything to them. They charged more in Western countries to subsidize the cost in developing countries. They established the Children's Research Fund at a London children's hospital and granted the charity the exclusive rights to manufacture the valve to ensure its cheap global availability. When Tom Solomon was researching his book, he found a note handwritten in pencil indicating that Roald Dahl had actually written the draft of the Lancet article. He wasn't credited as a co-author because he didn't need to be. To him, he was just a concerned father and a quirky author who was making a few connections. He left out the part about studying the problem during a time of severe distress, conceiving the solution, identifying and putting together a team of experts on the scientific, industrial, and manufacturing sides, raising the money for it all, and then helping to market the use of the device worldwide. In 1981, Dahl wrote George's Marvelous Medicine about an 8-year-old boy named George Cranky who mixes up 44 different ingredients including horseradish, floor polish, lipstick, antifreeze, and toothpaste into an elixir that turns his grandmother into a giant. He dedicated the book to doctors everywhere. And that's the incredible story of Roald Dahl's second most influential scientific impact. Roald married the actress Patricia Neal in 1953. She was already one of Hollywood's most recognizable figures, and she won the Oscar for Best Actress for her role in HUD just 2 years after her infant son's accident. But in 1965, she suffered a series of cerebral hemorrhages. She was only 39, and she was pregnant with her and Dahl's 5th child. The strokes put her in a coma for 3 weeks, and Variety magazine even ran an article about her death. But she did not die. She was left with Broca's aphasia, also called expressive aphasia, in which the speech centers in the left side of the brain malfunction. She also had some symptoms of Wernicke's aphasia, which affected her ability to understand language. So imagine not being able to read or understand more than short bits in conversation, which you may not remember for more than a few seconds, as you know exactly what you want to say while not being able to think of the words to use. Dahl wrote in an article for Ladies' Home Journal called My Wife Patricia Neal that when she couldn't find the right words, she would invent them. He published a sample conversation between Pat and some friends.
Listen, will someone get me another sooty swatch?
A what?
Oh, you know, a soap driver.
You want a big soap driver or a small one?
Oh, come on. You know quite well what I want.
What?
A red hairdryer.
You want another drink, don't you?
That's right. A drink.
Why didn't you say so?
You make me skitch. That's what you do. You give me the sinkers.
It's a comical scene, but it's also tragic. Dahl was concerned about learned helplessness or learned non-use during Pat's recovery. Every time she pointed to an object instead of saying its actual name, her recovery would be derailed that much more. Every time someone suggested the right word to facilitate the conversation or to soothe Pat's frustration, the worse it would be for her. His solution was to basically become Miss Trunchbull. That actually went against the doctor's recommendations. They said 1 hour of intensive speech therapy a day was optimal, and more than that could actually slow her recovery. Dahl didn't buy it. He forced her to endure the difficulties with speech, not letting up until she got the right words, and it started the moment she got out of bed. The motto was, no self-pity and no sympathy. In that same Ladies' Home Journal article, Dahl described how Pat wanted an obligon, which turned out to be a cigarette. By the end of the exchange, she had a sense of what a cigarette was, enough to say,
I'll go crazy if I don't have one. I'll jake my diodals.
everyone knows there's only one way to stop jaking your diodals. Dahl organized a stream of friends and neighbors who came by each day to talk with Pat, turning obligons into cigarettes and soap drivers into drinks. She relearned letters and numbers and began to process short sentences in newspapers. She went to the theater to see the Beatles film Help, but couldn't understand any of it. Constantly subjecting her to a full life she wasn't ready for was uncomfortable for friends and for family, and the whole thing seemed cruel. It was so upsetting that Pat said, I've lost my mind. I really have, and the babies all know it. Couldn't they find a balance between getting Pat to improve without her having to have such a hard time with it all? No, not really. Barry Farrell of Life magazine was there to document the whole process, which eventually became the book Pat and Roald. She had a perfectly healthy baby, and Dahl said about her progress that the devil is losing his grip, and a former makeup counter attendant joined Roald to pry the rest of Pat from Satan's grasp. Valerie Eaton Griffith had absolutely no training whatsoever in nursing or rehabilitation, yet somehow she knew exactly what to do. She spent the days with Pat really just relearning life, going to the store to get familiar with groceries and prices, flipping through magazines and gossiping about celebrities, many of whom Pat knew. The pictures in children's books helped her make connections between words and meaning, and the constant human interaction helped to alleviate her boredom, concentration, and inertia. With Roald as drill sergeant and Valerie as a blend of friend and persistent teacher, Pat started to walk again. Her double vision went away. Her diodals stopped jaking. She had her life back, and she wasn't just able to return to acting, she was nominated for another Oscar just 3 years later. Their intense therapeutic regimen turned into Valerie's book, A Stroke in the Family, a how-to guide for family and friends to rehabilitate loved ones, and that laid the groundwork for the adoption of their intensive methods worldwide and the creation of the Stroke Association in the United Kingdom. Pat's marriage with Roald dissolved in the 1980s. They'd both been through decades of tragedy, including losing their 7-year-old daughter to measles encephalitis, which happened after their son's accident and before Pat's stroke. And although she called him Roald the Rotten, Pat maintained that the genius of his grueling, unconventional approach saved her. She eventually founded the Patricia Neal Rehabilitation Center for stroke, spinal cord, and brain injury patients. More than 15 years after Pat's recovery, Roald Dahl would write a fantastic tale of a giant who spoke in gobblefunk, with mental confusion as feeling biff-squiggled, good dreams as fizzwizards, and bad ones as trogglehumpers. All nonsense words that somehow communicated exactly what the giant intended to say. The crisp, clear delineation between the wild mind of an artist and the serious pursuits of the scientist is a relatively recent phenomenon. Da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, and he also drew the Vitruvian Man and invented both the parachute and the helicopter as he studied botany, chemistry, and engineering. M.C. Escher, was he an artist or a mathematician? And Carl Sagan and Isaac Asimov spent their lives trying to demystify the cosmos as they imagined what might be out there in all its terror and hope. In the October 26, 1929 issue of the Saturday Evening Post, Albert Einstein said, "If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music." Roald Dahl left an indelible mark on our minds with Matilda, The Fabulous Mr. Fox, the BFG, Willy Wonka, and he also helped fix our broken brains in which those fantastic worlds can exist. We should not be asking whether it's more important to cultivate genius in the sciences or in the arts. The question we should be asking is, what's the difference? And as always, thanks for watching.